My tight end one this year is Dalton Kincaid. He was insanely productive last year. He averaged 74.2 yards per game, was the fourth best mark by any Power 5 tight end since at least 2014. His 2.42 yards per route run ranks eighth best since 2014. And impressively, he did this despite playing through multiple injuries. A shoulder injury, which caused him to leave one game early and then miss the next week, plus a small fracture in his back, which he played through, but it caused him to miss the combine. In the 2 games he missed, Utah saw their passing yards per game average fall by 55%. Kincaid leads the class in career drop rate, just 2 drops on 138 targets with Utah. Leads the class in depth adjusted yards per target over expectation. And he's the best career targeted passer rating of any tight end since at least 2014, just above Kyle Pitts. He was the only tight end selected in round 1 this year. The Bills thought the Chargers were going to take him. They were very glad they did not. They also moved up ahead of Dallas, who they thought were going to take him. And so it wouldn't shock me if they thought he was the best or second best pure receiver in this class, ahead of Jordan Addison, ahead of Zay Flowers, and possibly ahead of Jackson Smith and Jigba. And the landing spot seems perfect. He has an elite quarterback who doesn't have a clear wide receiver too. And so after so many years of getting dunked on by Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce, Brandon Beane went out and got him an elite tight end of his own. Kincaid isn't much of a blocker, so I'm expecting sort of Mike Gesicki-esque big slot wide receiver usage with a lot more production because Kincaid is a way better prospect than Gesicki was. The only concerns with Kincaid are that, well, he's pretty old. He's 11 months older than Kyle Pitts. That just doesn't really bother me too much, or at least not as much as it typically would, because he's pretty inexperienced for the position. He was a basketball star in high school and only played 1 year of high school football. But the other big concern is way more damning. Kincaid wasn't the most productive tight end on Utah in 2021. That distinction belongs to Brant Kuithe. Kuithe suffered a season-ending injury in week 4 last year. But before that injury, Kuithe was again outproducing Kincaid. And I think this is legitimately concerning. What would Kincaid's draft capital have looked like had Kuithe played the full season? And then how highly might we think of Kuithe, who's going to be returning to school for his 6th season this year? I think this is a legitimate red flag, but what I will say is Kincaid's 2022 season didn't come out of nowhere. In 2021, he averaged 11.3 yards per target. That's a top 10 mark since 2014. And his 2.09 yards per route run led all tight ends from the class. You really like to see that sort of hyper efficiency before a breakout. That plus his 2022 season was legitimately insane. Add it all up, and I feel really good about Kincaid as not only the tight end 1 in this rookie class, but as a top 10 pick in rookie drafts in tight end premium leagues. My tight end 2 is Michael Mayer, who legitimately has one of the best analytics profiles of any tight end to come out in a long time. As a 19-year-old freshman, he ranks 2nd on Notre Dame in receiving yards, ahead of NFL receivers like Ben Skoranek, Tommy Tremble, and Kevin Austin. As a sophomore, he averaged 70 yards per game. That's the 6th best mark by any Power 5 tight end since at least 2014. The following year, he averaged 2.44 yards per route run. That's the best mark by any tight end in this class and the 7th best mark by any tight end since 2014. If touchdown adjusted, that improves to 5th best. And his 33.3% yardage market share ranks 3rd best by any tight end since at least 2008. He was the 3rd tight end off the board, but only 1 pick behind Sam LaPorta in early round 2. Las Vegas doesn't stand out to me as an amazing landing spot, but without Darren Waller and Foster Moreau this year, I do expect him to be an immediate contributor. The main concern on him is that he's supposedly unathletic, which means he lacks upside. But he ran a 4.70 40-yard dash at the combine, and that's really not that bad. That was faster than Zach Ertz, Jordan Reed, TJ Hawkinson, and Dalton Schultz. Wasn't much slower than Mark Andrews. To me, he looks exactly like a Zach Ertz clone or a rich man's TJ Hawkinson. I think with a little bit more upside. I feel really good about Michael Mayer as an early round 2 pick in tight end premium rookie drafts. My tight end 3 is Sam LaPorta, who follows George Kittle, Noah Fant, and TJ Hawkinson as the next Iowa tight end to find his way onto our fantasy rosters. My pre-draft model didn't like LaPorta as much as Mayer or Kincaid because he wasn't as productive by yards per game or as efficient in yards per route run, which are 2 of the most predictive metrics we have for tight ends. But in his defense, Iowa's dumpster fire-like offense is mostly to blame. Iowa's quarterbacks threw only 7 touchdown passes all of last year, and their quarterback ranked as PFF's 4th worst graded passer. Within this context, his numbers do look a lot more impressive. If you're really good, but your quarterback's really bad, some of the metrics in which you'd really stand out are going to be market share metrics, and that's exactly the case with LaPorta. He returned a 26.6 yardage market share as a junior. That's the 15th best mark by any tight end in 20 years. Last season, that jumped to 34.4%, the 2nd best mark by any tight end since 2008. So within that context, maybe his yards per game numbers are more impressive than Mayer's, and perhaps by yards per route run too. Mayer averages 1.95 yards per route run in his career, which isn't a lot more than LaPorta's 1.88. And LaPorta actually was more efficient than Mayer by yards per route run in games against Power 5 opponents. LaPorta also led this class in routes run as an isolation receiver, led the class in routes run when lined up out wide. He led the class in targets against man coverage, and led the class in yards per route run against man coverage. What this means is, given LaPorta's atrocious quarterback play and the higher level of difficulty routes he was running, I'm very open to the idea that he's actually a better prospect than Mayer. The NFL did see it that way, perhaps in part because he's also a much better athlete than Mayer. Detroit seems like a pretty great landing spot. There's a lot of target competition for him there, but not much competition at the tight end position. And this is a good offense that runs at a fast pace, an offense that we want to be invested in. So although it was really close, I did ultimately decide to side with my model and slide him in at tight end 3, just barely behind Michael Mayer. My tight end 4 is Luke Musgrave, who is an absolute freak athlete. He had the 2nd best athletic profile in this class by my metric, Spork score. Unfortunately, his production profile was far less good. In fact, it was pretty bad. Musgrave ranks either worst or 2nd worst in this class by career drop rate, career yards after the catch per reception, and career missed tackles forced per reception. He only had 3 career games with at least 60 yards. Michael Mayer had 6 times as many such games, and he is a year younger. In Musgrave's defense, 2 of those games did come this year, and those were the only 2 games he played all year due to injury. So perhaps there could have been some monster year where he would have been drafted in round 1. It feels a little unfair to blame him for that injury, but also it feels like a little bit too much of a projection for me. I think he was probably overdrafted, although the film analysts I talked to would definitely disagree. Ultimately, I don't think it really matters all that much. The NFL is telling us this is the 4th best tight end in this class. He has upside due to his athleticism, and he's not a great blocker, so presumably he was drafted as a receiver for a team that desperately needs a reliable receiver. My tight end 5 is Luke Schoonmaker. My pre-draft model didn't really love him. He spent way too much time blocking for my liking. But in Schoonmaker's defense, that's true of every Michigan tight end. And he is freakishly athletic, and he did flash some upside as a pass catcher. Schoonmaker ranked 2nd on his team in receptions and receiving yards per game last year. He earned his quarterbacks a 131.7 career passer rating when targeted. That ranked 2nd best in the class. He ranked 3rd best by career depth adjusted yards per target over expectation. Although one concern, he did break tackles at a Zach Ertzian level, which you don't like to see. But his draft capital was great, as was the landing spot. To a Dallas offense that lost Dalton Schultz, who has seen nearly 200 targets over the past 2 seasons. Ultimately, I'm not very excited to draft Schoonmaker, but I am seeing some upside and a clear pathway to immediate production. My tight end 6 is Darnell Washington, and this is our first meaningful deviation from draft capital. Supposedly he fell to round 3 only because of medical concerns, but his prospect profile is pretty great. He's another freak athlete. He's probably the best blocker in the class, although I view that as a negative from a fantasy perspective. On that point, his raw pass catching numbers aren't great, but in his defense, he was playing behind Brock Bowers. He's guaranteed to be our tight end 1 in this video next year, and being stuck behind Brock Bowers is a bit like playing behind Bijan Robinson or Patrick Mahomes. And I am seeing quite a bit of upside for him as a pass catcher. Here's a crazy stat. Darnell Washington leads this class of tight ends in career ... yards per target average, depth adjusted yards per target, yards per reception, missed tackles forced per reception, yards after the catch per reception, and explosive play rate. So maybe he's a way better receiver than he gets credit for. It was just Brock Bowers standing in his way. The big problem is, after being buried behind Brock Bowers, he's now stuck behind Pat Freiermuth. So although he's my tight end 6, and I do think he's a really good player, he's still not someone I'm very excited to own. Well, there you have it. That's my top 6 tight ends for rookie drafts. If you like this video, you can check out some of the links in the description, or you can just go to fantasypoints.com. Please also remember to like and subscribe. If you do, I'll make some more videos just like this.